The Big Ten was the best conference in college football last season and produced a national champion along with the most teams from any conference to make the college football playoffs. So this year, it's going to be very competitive. I think the depth gets better this season. So let's take a look at all the teams in the Big Ten and do our post-spring Big Ten power rankings and tier list. Let's start by just taking a peek at the tier names. We've got Big Ten contention at the top, the teams that are going to be contending for a Big Ten title. This is going to be a much shorter list than the amount of teams we saw in the ACC list because it's just going to be much more difficult to win a Big Ten title. We saw a Big Ten team win the national title last year. So if we're saying you can contend for a Big Ten title, it's almost like saying you can contend for a national title. Then we've got our dark horses tier, teams that could realistically be in the picture if a couple of things break their way. Spoilers, teams that are probably just going to have more of a chance at wrecking some of those top team seasons and maybe having a fringe shot. Then we've got our bowl hopefuls. They're more focused on making a bowl game, being competitive before we get to the rebuilding tier, which is a nice way of saying teams that won't be very good. So we're going to do a tier list and a power ranking kind of at the same time, side by side like we did last time. So let's go ahead and start at the bottom. Starting at the bottom, it's going to be the rebuilding tier, and there's three teams in this tier at the bottom of the power ranking. Starting at number 18, we've got Purdue. The Boilermakers bring in UNLV head coach Barry Odom to try and right the ship. Purdue was one of the worst power conference teams in recent memory this last season, turning in a 1-11 record with one win over Indiana State to start the season. They should be better this year, just by the law of averages, and they did do a decent job of bringing in some talent through the transfer portal, which is an easy thing to do these days, especially when you're a program like Purdue that has the resources to do it, are superior to some of those group of five programs where they might be shopping in. And so they did a decent job at that. There's still a significant talent gap here, and still fresh in the mind is what happened last season. They also didn't really do a good job of retaining any of the talented players that were on the existing roster. So Odom is pretty much starting from scratch. At number 17, we've got Maryland. Maryland's got some things to like. I do think that Justin Martin will probably be a solid signal caller under Mike Locksley. And there's some things here that, the offensive potency that they've had recently under him, it has not gone away, but the defense has been significantly worse. He's shaken up his staff this season, and there's just a lot less certainty and a lot less things to be confident about with Maryland. I get nervous talking about Maryland football because I think of this bottom tier, that's a team that could pop potentially if maybe things gel really well, but I'm just not super confident on them this year. At number 16, we've got Northwestern. The main difference between Northwestern and Maryland being that they did a few things that I think really do pop, and I look at and say, oh, that could actually be good. First off, I love the staff continuity. David Braun has kept his same offensive and defensive coordinator. He came in a year ago, 2 years ago, and took over in an interim capacity after the scandal, saw Pat Fitzgerald get fired, and he did a great job. He led them 8 wins this last season. He was able to actually have his own coordinators, and so this is his second year, only his second year with his real coordinators, and I think they could make something happen. They go out and get Preston Stone in the transfer portal. They also get Griffin Wild, the great wide receiver from South Dakota State. I think there's talent here. I think the Northwestern offense could be pleasantly surprising once again, especially with the return of Cam Porter as well, and the defense is where David Braun, it's his specialty. So I think they could be complimentary this year, and wouldn't be surprised if they were able to pop a bowl game off, but at the end of the day, the talent level, there's just a really big gap between them and all the other teams in the conference, and so it's just going to be really difficult for them to overcome that. So let's get to the next tier, which is going to be the bowl hopefuls. Teams that think they can make a bowl game are going to be more worried about that than necessarily contention, and they're going to worry about being competitive. We've got 3 programs in here. Coming in at number 15, we've got UCLA. The Bruins made a big splash move when they added Nico Iamaleava out of the transfer portal after he transferred from Tennessee. There was a lot of drama there, but I've always felt like that was an awkward fit, and I don't think this is necessarily going to gel. You've got a project quarterback and a dysfunctional offense that was pretty disastrous last season under Deshaun Foster. They end up firing Eric Bieniemy. Tino Sunseri is their new offensive coordinator, who I do think is a better mind. He helped engineer a solid offense at Indiana last season. He was a mentor to Curtis Rourke. So there is some stuff to like with UCLA, just a little bit more than Northwestern and Maryland and Purdue, but the defensive regression is really there. The talent level has continued to dip. I've got a lot of concerns with UCLA football. I don't think having Nico there is going to be enough to just really spark some positive results. So they're definitely going to be in a bowl hopeful tier. At number 14, we've got Wisconsin. The Badgers Riders have been pretty aimless under Luke Fickell, and it's clear that the things Fickell was trying to implement in the first couple of seasons have not been working. So they've got to kind of flush it, and they're trying to reset, and they made some new hires. Jeff Grimes, the offensive coordinator, don't know if I love that hire. He basically got demoted at Kansas this last season, and so there's just a few things with Wisconsin where I don't know, are we going to see them finally click this year and have a nice season? They had Billy Edwards Jr., the quarterback, another thing I'm not super thrilled about, and defensively, they've been spotty at best. That's kind of been what they've leaned on recently, but Wisconsin doesn't have something that it seems like is going to set them apart this year unless Luke Fickell finally can just sink in and do what he wants to do, but the culture shift they try to do at Wisconsin and the shift in identity has not worked. At number 13, we got Michigan State. I've got more confidence in the Spartans because of this coaching staff and because of their young performance that they've had. The defensive line showed a ton of promise this last season, and that defense had some great things pop up, even though they had a ton of guys hit the portal. And then offensively speaking, they have a lot of really young contributors that are starting to blossom, and I think that there's some high upside if those guys do blossom this season. And like I said, Jonathan Smith does more with less. So as a head coach, as a rising head coach in Michigan State, I think he's a great fit going forward for the Spartans, and I think that they can have some success this year. This gets us into the next tier, though, which is the spoilers tier. We're going to have 5 teams in this tier. There's a lot of teams that occupy this one. It's the most of any tier in this conference with these 5. And so we'll start at the team that's at number 12, which is going to be Nebraska. The margins are really thin here between all these teams, and having Nebraska at 12 makes me a little uncomfortable because of Matt Rule and his history and what he's done. But I'm concerned with the things that happened this offseason, mainly losing their defensive coordinator, Tony White. They're attempting to replace him. They bring in Butler, who's going to be the man, and he's an internal promotion to be the guy. And they lost 2 defensive starters, and they lost 4 guys that were in a position to be starters this season. Nebraska fans push back on that, but it's just a fact. 2 guys started last season and left in the portal. 4 guys were projected to start before they hit the portal, and now they're in the portal. So defensively, they are a little bit thinner than they were last season. They did bring in some other guys to the portal, but they're not going to be as proven as those other guys were. Offensively speaking, they upgraded. I think Holgorsen as the OC is great. I think they have better weapons this year for Raiola, so we'll see. But right now, I think Nebraska might be in a similar position to last season, sort of just battling in the middle tier of the Big Ten. 12 seems a little low, but that's above 6 teams in the modern Big Ten because there's 18 now. So it's not that bad of a position to be in. At number 11, we got Iowa, a model of consistency under Kirk Ferentz. The defense last season actually took a bit of a step back, which was a little surprising to see. I look for them to maybe balance out a little bit more this season, but we'll see what happens. They've sort of struggled to replace some of those big-time contributors, like the secondary without DeJean looked vulnerable last season. Offensively speaking, they bring in Mark Gronowski. They have improved under Tim Lester, and they're looking a little bit better in that department, but we'll see if the offensive improvement is linear or if it just sort of levels off. I would lean towards it leveling off because it's always been more complimentary under Kirk Ferentz, and sometimes that's being generous. At number 10, we've got Rutgers. This is a team I really, really like. They loaded up on the offensive weapons. Ian Strong is a proven wide receiver. They bring in DT Sheffield to be another big-time guy. He was a 1,000-yard receiver from last season. And Ethan Kaliakmanis is actually an analytics darling and a guy that doesn't get a ton of hype on the national stage, but I really think they play with a physical edge. They brought in a transfer running back in CJ Campbell Jr. Defensively, they took a few hits through the portal, but do still have some very talented guys coming back, and they've got some stuff they can hang their hat on. They have a clear identity, and that is something that I really value. You talk about the difference between a team like Rutgers and Wisconsin. Rutgers has a much clearer identity right now, even though Wisconsin might look better on paper, and that's one of the reasons for the discrepancy between where those two teams are. At number 9, we've got Illinois. The Fighting Illini, very high on a lot of people's radars this year. You've got people putting them preseason top 15, top 25. They're in that range. 9th in the Big Ten is pretty dang good considering the teams that we're going to look at that are above them. So they're kind of almost in the receiving votes category in that department. They bring back Luke Altmaier. They bring back a lot of offensive contributors. They return a ton of starters. But I think the disconnect from where I have them and other people do is how good they were last season. Illinois lost every top contender they played, and they had several one-score victories, including 2 overtime wins. And so I think they were much closer to being like an 8-win team than they were to being an 11 or 12-win team. And Brett Bielema's teams have typically had kind of a firm ceiling on how high they can rise. We'll see if that's the case. Maybe development and maybe returning starters is just enough for Illinois and what they need, and they make a huge leap this year. In that case, I'll be proven wrong. But until then, I'm going to temper my expectations just a little bit with Illinois. At number 8, I've got Minnesota, a team that defeated Illinois late in the season last year and also brings a ton back. I think a lot of the hype people are shoving towards Illinois right now should be directed towards Minnesota. There's a lot of things that are great. Drake Lindsey's going to get a shot at quarterback. They bring back guys like Darius Taylor. Their defense is loaded once again. And PJ Fleck had a really pleasant, strong finish to the year last season in Minnesota. And I really think they're going to be able to effectively replace the contributors they lost this offseason. And it's just a tried and true formula. And I think Fleck and Minnesota are going to be looking at a year they can circle this year as a year they can really make a push and do something special. Let's get to the next tier then, which is going to be the Dark Horses tier. We've got 4 teams in this tier, and teams that most people, I think, have in this range. At number 7, it's the Washington Huskies. Under Jedd Fisch, they're very talented. They've stacked at a really impressive rate, and there's a lot more guys in the right positions that they've got faith in. You've got Jonah Coleman at running back. You've got Damon Williams Jr., who is a budding star. If you watched him play at the end of last season, you'll know that that is the truth. Defensively, they are just star-studded, I should say, on the defensive side of the football, and I'm really looking forward to what they can do this year. The only thing that makes me a little weary about Washington is losing both of their coordinators this last offseason. The coordinators went on to accept other jobs and promote themselves, essentially, and so that's going to be the one volatile factor with the Huskies is readjusting with these new coordinators, but I do think they did an effective job of doing that. Fisch is a guy that elevates programs fast. We saw him in just 3 years at Arizona make something pretty special happen. We'll see how quick his timeline can move with the Huskies, with what he's been able to do through the transfer portal to kickstart the rebuild. At number 6 is the Michigan Wolverines. Michigan is a team that is going to have a fantastic defense again. I have no doubts about that. Their offense needs to be more complementary and more of a net positive this year for them to make that step forward. I think their offense will be in that territory. I think if they turn in a great year offensively, we could see them push their ceiling, but I like the Justice Haynes addition, the Donovan McCulley addition, and I think Bryce Underwood could manage this offense effectively if they put him in a position to succeed. Chip Lindsey, the new OC, I love that fit with Underwood at quarterback. He's not going to be asking Underwood to do too much. So Michigan, a team that I think could return to contention status this season. At number 5, I've got USC. The Trojans had a pretty disastrous season offensively by Lincoln Riley's very high standards, and the defense showed some positive results toward the end of last season. So people are totally overlooking this team, but D'Anton Lynn's defense has totally anchored in and anchored down, and I think offensively we're not going to get a season as dysfunctional as it was last year. 2 years in a row for Lincoln Riley. He lets go of his offensive coordinator. They brought in a new one, and Lincoln Riley's calling the plays anyway. So I think USC is going to really have a big boost in their offensive production, and their defense, I think, is going to continue to stabilize. So going to be a big year for the Trojans. I have them at 5. At number 4, I've got the Indiana Hoosiers. Indiana goes portal heavy again, but you trust their portal evaluation so much from last season that it's hard to doubt Indiana, especially when you look at their favorable schedule and the fact that some of these guys were guys that I was really high on before Indiana went and got them. Like we've got Fernando Mendoza at quarterback. So there's a lot of things to really like, along with the fact that now there's a foundation at Indiana. There's proven guys that we already knew were legit and awesome dudes. And I'm thinking about guys like Elijah Surratt. And so Indiana going to be really good once again. I think going to be in fringe CFP contention again. And we finally reached the top tier, which is Big Ten contention, where we've got the 3 teams you probably suspected would be up here: Oregon, Ohio State, and Penn State. We've got Oregon at number 3. The Ducks are a program that recently, in recent memory, hasn't necessarily shown quite the same ability that the Ohio States and Penn States of the world and Alabamas of the world have shown to reload year after year, rather than having to rebuild. And this is going to be a tough test for the Ducks. They lost the most production we've seen them lose in a while. They don't have a proven quarterback. They've got Dante Moore, and they lose plenty of guys on the defense side of the ball, plenty of skill players. And so they reload as best as they can using the portal, but we'll see just how effectively they can reload this season. Are they the type of program that's going to be right back in national title contention with what they did this offseason? Or are we going to see a 9-4 season for them this year where they try to get back into getting some of those more solid factors on their roster? We'll see. I have my doubts, but they'll still probably be a great team either way, and probably in the Big Ten title conversation either way. At number 2, I've got Ohio State. The Buckeyes have some elite players coming back. I'm thinking about Caleb Downs. I'm thinking about the fact that they have a 5-star quarterback in Julian Sayin, and they've got options in that quarterback room as well. I'm thinking about the fact that Jeremiah Smith, arguably the best player in college football, is back on this team as well for his sophomore season. But they do lose both coordinators, which is something that you don't necessarily like to see, especially because Jim Knowles played a huge factor, and Chip Kelly played huge factors into getting this team into a great position. Yes, they do have some stable pieces back, like Brian Hartline he was the co-offensive coordinator last season, but still just a little bit less stable than maybe it was last season. So I don't think this is a case where they simply reload. They're still going to be an elite team and in national title contention, but that's the one thing that gives me some pause and some concern. And then we get to number 1 on the Big Ten Power Rankings, which is going to be Penn State. And I know some people are rolling their eyes right now because Penn State has the reputation of not being able to win big games, and James Franklin allegedly can't do it, even though I think he can do it. He just hasn't yet. But Penn State just has everything you love to see. I love the fact that they went out and poached Jim Knowles to be their new defensive coordinator. That was a huge move by the Nittany Lions. They bring back arguably the best running back duo in college football history. They've got Drew Aller back. They add a guy like Trevor Pena at wide receiver. Defensively, they are just stocked and loaded. I have no doubt that they're going to have a big-time playmaker step up like Abdul Carter did the last couple of seasons. And I really think Penn State's going to be a fantastic position to potentially win a national title this year, and that's how high I am on the Nittany Lions. I think they are going to be right there in that picture, and they could totally do it, or they could not do it again, but Penn State is a team that has this year circled on the calendar and says, this is the year we think we can do it. So it'd be pretty devastating if they don't do something special this season. So there it is, my complete Big Ten Power Rankings, my complete Big Ten tier list as well. Let me know down in the comments what you think about the tier list, what you think about the power rankings, which teams do you think I'm being fair to, maybe unfair to, what might you shuffle around. Next conference we'll be doing a video with power ranking and tier list will be the Big 12, so keep an eye out for that one. But that's all I have for you guys in this video, and I will see you guys later this week.